Here's a case study on shin splints, 315 pounds, and I only have a partial chessboard. We're going to have to go full Dark Knight Detective on this one. Good morning. Happy Monday. I have Neuro Coffee in hand, and it is perfect. All right. Hey, we got a busy Monday going. So I'm going to dig right into Monday's Q&A. This one comes from Johnny, and Johnny says, "Hello, Bill." Hello, Johnny. "Thanks as always for your content. I found some good success in using your thought process with the people I work with. I have a client that's presenting in a way that I'd like to hear you unpack." And so Johnny's going to give us a little bit of an incomplete chessboard, so I'm going to go ahead and throw that up now. But this is on a Division I school defensive lineman, so he's a defensive end. Johnny says he's got a narrow ISA with an elevated rib cage when lying supine. You can see the measures here as how Johnny has presented them. And then he gives me some additional information. He says visually his feet are flat and he has high muscle tone and tricep suri group bilaterally that he reports, he's talking about the patient, he reports that is the cause of his shin splint symptoms. And Johnny says, "I apologize for the incomplete chessboard. Hopefully it's enough to provide some insight. Thanks." Okay. So a couple things, Johnny. When you write the word full and then you have numbers, you're sort of confounding your outcome. So just a little word of advice: just try to throw up numbers so you have a comparator there that's equivalent. It makes it a little bit easier. But I think we've got enough to work with here that we can actually come up with something. First thing that we want to talk about is what is the coffee cup? So we talk about chessboards and coffee cups, and the coffee cups are the things that stand out the most. And so in looking at the information you gave me one big giant 20-ounce coffee cup, and that's going to be the foot position. So let's talk about that first. So when you talk about having an athlete with a lower arch, so we're going to look at an early propulsive foot, which is actually going to have a pretty decent arch there. It's a supinated ER foot. And as we move through this middle propulsive range where we have the ankle rocker, this is where that arch is going to come down low. And so this is going to be us moving through middle propulsion to get to max propulsion. So what you may have here is an athlete that is trying to stay as close to max propulsion as possible. Now he's a very big human being. He's 315 pounds. He's a defensive end. And so chances are to move that quickly, that size quickly, he's going to have to be really, really close to max propulsion almost at all times. Now, if that's the case, this is a position of internal rotation. He's putting a lot of force into the ground already. But based on your measures, we don't have a lot of hip IR. So where is he getting the IR coming from? So now we got to start looking at pelvic orientation. All right. So based on one of your other comments here, where you actually said that when you measured his shoulder external rotation as being full, you said you put it in quotes because the thorax was posteriorly tilted on the table. So that's very, very useful. That means we had a thorax that was anteriorly tilted prior to laying him down, which is a pretty good indicator that we've got an anterior orientation of the pelvis. Now, we've got a confounding factor here that makes us question whether we've got an anterior orientation of the pelvis, because you've got 80 degrees of hip external rotation. Well, how the heck do we get 80 degrees? Because what I should see with an anterior orientation of the pelvis is a loss of this hip ER. So let me give you a little hint as to what's probably happening here, especially with somebody of his size. As you're moving the hip into traditional measures of hip flexion to measure your ERs, you're getting a left lumbar rotation on the table. So as you bring him up into hip flexion, the spine flexes on the left side. That's external rotation of the spine towards that side, and that magnifies the external rotation measure. Now, how can we say this? Well, your right hip flexion doesn't have a pinching sensation like it does on the left side. So we had that pinch on the left, which tells us that hip flexion stops there. We don't have that on the right side. And you said that shoulder flexion was about full compared to a very limited shoulder flexion on the left side. So what we have is we have a spine that is facing the right rather aggressively. And again, that's what magnifies our ER measures on that side. So the spine is oriented to the right, it's facing the right, so everything on the right side is going to have this really good looking ER. We're not going to get the compressive strategy in the front of the hip, and it's going to like all loosey-goosey. So what we have here, based on body mass, pelvic orientation, and such, is you probably got a wide ISA, you probably got a guy that has left posterior compression like nobody's business, that is cranking him around, and he is in a right hand turn. So here's what we got to do. We got to undo this right hand turn. First and foremost, we have to eliminate interference. So the things you're going to want to avoid in training this human being: no toe touch activities, no deep squatting activities. Because of the way that we measured that left hip ER, we know that we're going to get lumbar spine substitutions under those circumstances. So we don't want to use those activities, because all he's going to do is give us a lumbar substitution. We're not going to recapture what we want. So what we have to do is actually teach him how to create this left hand turn. So here's the progressions that we want to talk about. So number one, we'll put him on his back. We're going to start in a supine cross connect, and we're going to teach him how to start to turn left. So we've got the left hip extended. We're going to use the right hip flexion to our advantage. So we bring that knee up. It's going to actually turn us to the left and start our progression. Then we roll him to the left sideline. If he's a wide ISA, this is going to be really advantage. We get the AP expansion, and we start to magnify this left hand turn. And then finally, we're going to turn him over into prone, and we're going to finish that left hand turn. Once we get that, we got money, because chances are we're going to get a whole bunch of our stuff back. We're going to start to see the hip IRs come back. We're going to normalize a lot of that hip ER as well. We take them into the gym. So you think about our supine cross connect, we can convert that into a supine arm bar and eventually turn it into the rolling variation of that as well. Hopefully we can get him up to standing, and we do standing cross connects under those circumstances to teach him how to manage gravity and hang on to his left hand turn. We can also build in a bunch of side-lying oblique sit activities, driving that right hip forward. Again, always magnifying the attempt to turn left. We bring him up to his feet. We do a staggered stance chopping activity. Again, we're teaching him to continue to create the yielding action on that posterior left-hand side, get some expansion there, and get him turned into the left. Sideways sled drags to the left is going to help us emphasize that left turn as well. And if you were paying attention to last Friday's video, we're going to put him in a right-handed suitcase carry now. Hopefully we've acquired enough hip flexion under these circumstances, and we can start to load a contralateral split squat or even a Jefferson split squat under these circumstances. He's a big dude. We want to give him some load, and the Jefferson is a great way to do that. Eventually, we want to start to think about dynamics. We got to start to load some of these connective tissues and rebuild this yielding strategy. So we're going to start with some A marches. That'll eventually become some variation of an A skip. And then we can think about using something a little bit more dynamic. And so we're going to have him run uphill on boxes and to capture some of this yielding strategy, so we can start to introduce that. But again, by moving him up levels, because he's such a big guy, he doesn't have to absorb all that stress into the connective tissues too quickly. But eventually we want him to be able to do so. So we want him to be able to bounce across the ground a little bit. Again, he's 315 pounds, so we take this with a grain of salt as to how dynamic we're going to make this. But like a triple A hop or something like that is, if you could get him to do that, that would probably be great. But again, he's a big dude, so you're going to have to kind of figure out how dynamic you're going to make these things. So Johnny, this is actually a great little chessboard to work on. It demonstrates the value of the things that stand out, those coffee cups that we start with, and then we can start to see the relationships that we build from there. So thank you, Johnny, for the question. I hope that's useful. If you have any other questions, go to askbillhartman@gmail.com, askbillhartman@gmail.com, and then we'll see you guys tomorrow.